In this video, I'm going to extend on what I mentioned in the Chapter 5 video, where the Chapter 4 video, I tell a lie, where I talked about well-being as being an important consideration in improving your creativity. So, there's a variety of different ways that we can approach well-being. There's a video that was made several years ago by I can't remember the guy's name. The guy who's on the Gruen transfer, Todd Sampson, where he did a series called Redesign My Brain, where he talked about improving creativity through different processes. So one of the things he talked about, just as an example, is any activity that puts you in the state of flow. So there's various things where we're going to talk about mindfulness in a second, but flow is another terminology which is very, very similar. And the idea is that participating in a task that's repetitive but simple can be a very good way of attaining mindfulness, which can help your brain have time to process the ideas that you're working on and to be able to come up with better projects. This is a very old idea. So if we go to, you may be familiar with the book, perhaps Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. We'll see if because it's okay. So there's a book. It's a fiction book. It has nothing to do with really Zen, or as the author says in the back, it also has nothing to do with really with motorcycle maintenance either. But this is again based on the book from 1948 called Zen and the Art of Archery, and the idea is that you can achieve a sense of mindfulness by doing a simple repetitive task. In this case, archery, but archery is a fairly expensive hobby and it's hard to do in an apartment, whereas a hobby that you can do more easily in an apartment is juggling. But an alternative could be, say, just bowling, for instance. Buying 6 cricket balls and just bowling into the nets can have a similar idea of just working towards a very simple and consistent task. So this is a very old idea, but it feeds into, and Zen and the Art of Archery, although it was written in the 50s, is based on principles of Zen Buddhism, which date back hundreds of years. Sydney University has, I think, a pretty good and clear guidelines for some concepts to do with mindfulness and well-being. Mindfulness has become something of a buzzword in the last 5 to 10 years, but that's not to say that it's not worthwhile. And mindfulness is just simply paying attention to what you're doing. This can roll into concepts like meditation, and there are plenty of good meditation apps. For instance, Headspace is highly recommended. But just a variety of relaxation exercises can be useful to help boost and foster your creativity. Beyond that, though, just general health and well-being is also shown to have a strong correlation with creativity. So these includes things like eating well, moving more, and sleeping better. So also things like fostering personal relationships important. Sleeping has by far the best correlation with not just creative performance, but almost all measures. That there is a chronic lack of sleep in modern societies. That most people are getting somewhere, at least on average, 90 minutes of sleep a day. They're lacking 90 minutes of sleep a day, and this is creating a huge. This it can be has observed hormonal imbalances, and it can be shown to have effects in, say, cognitive ability. So that includes things like being able to do maths problems, but also being able to generate creative solutions. This is an article which talks about the link between sleeping and creativity by The Atlantic, which is a well-respected news outlet, American news outlet. And a scientist who's an expert in sleep science is Matthew Walker, who has recently been doing a variety of podcasts and sort of as a book tour. Worthwhile is probably the 2-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, where he talks about the effect of this sleep deprivation that people are encountering. So, if anything else, if I could give you one piece of advice, it's to get enough sleep. Enough sleep that you feel comfortable when you wake up in the morning without an alarm clock. So Beyond that, there's like another well-respected resource in Australia is Beyond Blue, and if you go to Beyond Blue, they have advice for well-being, and there's a huge number of different tips that they offer for to improve advice for you to improve your well-being. So things like keeping a garden, which for me is definitely a stress or not a stress reliever. It just means I have more things in my house that I need to worry about that they're going to die. But cooking, spending time with pets, and playing an instrument. Playing instruments have been very well shown to enormously improve brain activity. Listening to music improves brain activity, but actually playing music drastically improves your brain activity, as observed under brain scanners, fMRI machines. So if you do play an instrument, it's something to consider as perhaps if you're working on something where you need to come up with creative solutions, working for an hour and then taking a 10-20 minute break to play an instrument and then coming back can be a very effective way of boosting your creativity. So a couple of other points that will go in these from Beyond Blue. I'm not suggesting that all of these will work for you, but ones that we've already mentioned. Singing and dancing, which is I think in the same ballpark as performing music. Getting out into the sun is important. Things like in the ballpark of moving, that doesn't have to be stressful exercise. That could be things like Pilates or yoga. And creativity, it's also point out here in Beyond Blue that there's a lot of links that say that creating something, even if it's something like, so we talked about cooking, writing, knitting, painting, drawing, that these things can also feed back and into positive well-being. Cooking I've mentioned, I've got here, and so here's more about getting a good night's sleep. So good sleep hygiene. So there's some very strong recommendations to help you sleep better. So those include having a time without having devices before you go to bed, really only using your bed for when you're using your bed. So predominantly when you're just going to sleep. Try not to read or watch TV or to try to use your bed for your bed rather than have it as being an extension of your living room. Another thing I mentioned previously is, for instance, you can install Flux or Night Shift, I think it's called on Apple products, where you have the color shift, the color schemes of your computers gets progressively more orange as you get later into the evening. And so they're my main tips for well-being. It's not an exhaustive list, but those things, if you take that into consideration, it may help you to be able to generate ideas. Certainly, I would always urge you to continue to talk to people. I think talking to people about ideas, being receptive to ideas, trying to when you identify an idea, to try and write that down so that you can revisit it later. I always recommend sending an email to yourself can be a really effective way of storing those ideas so that they don't escape you. Don't trust your memory because you'll find that you'll end up having a sense of anxiety that you had a good idea and you can't remember what it is. Okay, so that's all for this video.